Hey, you guys, not an actual book review, just a little tiny book bit. I wanted to talk about this just a tiny bit because I just started reading this book and I'm all excited. As you can see, I am wearing my Bill Gothard approved, ATI approved CULT wear. This is how I used to dress back the first 5 or 6 years that I was quiverful. This is exactly how I dressed. I've talked about this before. This jumper is a straight A line to my ankles, a very pretty fabric. I made it like 25 or 30 years ago, and I used real high end quilting fabric at the time that I bought at the little quilt shop in Madison. And I paid like $25 a yard. At the time, you could get decent fabric at $5 a yard. So it has lasted all this time. I've got my headscarf on like I would have worn in that time frame. And this dress, I quit wearing it. It's like lined and put together. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever made as far as how well it's constructed. Hey, Nitwit, I haven't seen you in forever. Excited. So I'm talking about this book that I just started reading, Lovingly Abused, a true story of overcoming CULTS, gaslighting, and legal educational neglect. It's written by Heather Heath. I know her on Twitter by Backslidden Harlot. I've liked her from the beginning since I've been talking to her. And she has definitely got an exciting story to tell. If you want to know anything about the ATI, if you have your ATI questions, and we all know that there's somebody that seems to make their living talking recently about the ATI, ILBP. She's saying that she's going to take the CULT down. Okay, this is the book that you must read if you want to know about this. This book is told from the perspective of a kid that was raised in the thing. Oh, is she the one that Kleenex woman was referring to? She's the one that Kleenex woman was attempting to interview or to get with some time ago. She's written a book finally about the whole thing, and I don't think that Kleenex has read the book because there's a lot of the information that's I know is factual from having lived this. Yes, I think it's a good idea. Hey, Tamara. So the book is filled with all kinds of information. At the very beginning, she breaks it down with definitions so that she doesn't have to keep repeating herself through the book. And I don't know how she did it because when I sat down and tried to write my story out, I've just been triggered, left and right, crazy triggered. So, all I can say is good for her. Good for her. I got to read you a couple of passages. Heather, please don't get mad. I'm going to just do a couple little things here so that everybody can catch kind of a sense of what this book is like. And also, some of these stories are just jaw dropped and they put to lie some things said about various cultural enforcers. They don't have a clue about any of this. This one kind of blew me away. One year at our conference, my mother was working the family viewing registration table and had my sister next to her on a blanket that looked like a dollhouse. The father from a popular reality show, who was at that time only famous for being an Arkansas state representative, noted how well my sister played on the blanket and praised my mother for such a devoted blanket training example. She goes on to explain that her mother didn't really blanket train her sister. Her sister just didn't like sharing her toys. If you have any doubts about that, she's talking about Jim Bob Duggar, who's running for state representative again as pro life and pro guns at the same time. And how does that even work? So she has talked about in here blanket training is coded. People don't talk about it openly. That's something that's taught only in the very inner workings. Like if they had sort of a conference There would be workshops that would be about that sort of thing. And even then, it'd be the innermost to the innermost. And it would be talked about in, oh my goodness, really, Nitwit? Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I never did it. I never did it to my children because I thought it was harmful and cruel, just like everything else taught by the Pearls. When I was part of this thing, I refused to do anything that harmed my children. I just would not do it. So she talks about that, how her mother wouldn't do it either and was considered to be too liberal in her squishy, loosey goosey because her mother would not use blanket training for the children. And she goes even farther in the description to blanket training than anything I heard in my old time in my old evangelical church. She explains that if your child is too young to crawl, that you manipulate the child's limbs until it has a limb off the blanket, and then you smack the child, which is way more cruel than waiting for the baby to squiggle off the blanket and beat it. It's just, I can't believe anybody could even. Hey, Sunday. Hey, Carolyn. I can't believe anybody would think that that is acceptable. That is never okay to do that sort of thing. A 6-month-old baby does not need discipline. They don't need to be hit with a piece of a piece of plastic plumbing pipe or a wooden spoon or a switch or anything else. That's just cruel. Babies have needs, and they only have one way to let them be known. My church promoted it. I was 6. We started attending, but my sister was, oh, your poor sister. It was given to me when we first joined, but my daughter had a platelet disorder, and there was no way I was going to lay a hand on her and beat her at all, because to beat a child with a platelet disorder is like, hello, CPS, and you might even be killing your child. So I wasn't going to do it, and I would be shamed if I were still part of Funny Town for drinking bougie water. Hey, whatever works for you. So she talks about how a lot of ATI families home church as well because they were just too special, too Christian-y, too perfect to mix with the backslidden members of places like the Independent Fundamentalist Baptist or any kind of non-denominational. So a lot of people did home church, and I knew that for my old church, we had people that would say we were sinful and would break off and go off in home church. It talks about countenance enhancing, which was one of the most ridiculous things with these frumpy clothing like that I'm wearing right now. I love this jumper because in the summer I could wear this, and it was 100% cotton with a t-shirt, and I get away without wearing a bra. And I'm all about not wearing a bra. So that was the one thing I did like about these jumpers. I could just get away with it. I want to read you just a couple of little sessions. She talks about courtship, everything you could think of about the whole thing, including whether or not ATI is a CULT. They certainly have enough damaging principles that they could be considered that, but I've seen them not considered to be a CLT because they do fail on a couple of things. If you take what they believe in and you push it up against a bike model, they don't 100% ring all the cherries. They just don't. I'm 53 now, still have had flashbacks from that whole church. I am so sorry. I am 61 and I am still having flashbacks from having been in this church in my 30s and 40s. It was not good. It wasn't until I left that I started to even realize. And I still have triggers. I'm still flashback. I've been triggered this week and last week horribly by my former coworker, first stealing my content, and then second telling a pile of lies about the IBLP. So I'm starting to read through this, and I've only gotten like 4 or 5 chapters in, but it's pretty interesting. And she tells the story in an interesting way. And even talks about how shameful everything is. I'm trying to get to the next part about you can't You can't expose a breast at all when you're breastfeeding, even in a room full of other women, because somebody might go lesbo. There's all kinds of crazy things. Head coverings. Yeah, we're talking about the head covering thing because each sect had its specific coverings. We went with a scarf on the head where I went to church. That was it. And it came down to the head covering people and the non head covering people knocking heads, and our pastor deciding that we did not need to be wearing head coverings. It just came down to that. She's talking about the hedge of protection, homeschooling, home churching, home industry. Um, okay, where is it? Where is it? I am looking for a part where she talks about leadership and training. Here I see neck bows, parent planners. Spiritual leaders, strongholds, training centers. Um, she breaks this down. While most of the ATI's teaching was done at home, the training centers where kids were sent for a little more conditioning than their parents or churches could provide. There is all kinds of different teaching and wisdom. She's talking about the wisdom walks. Let me go back to, I'm trying to find the part where she talks about whether ATI, IBLP is actually a church. I should have marked this in my. Because one of the things that, whoops, let me get my Kindle, which I dropped on the floor. I probably added a crack to the mini church. So many different programs. C word, I didn't go far back enough. Countenance enhancing. If I were doing something with countenance enhancing, I would have a big frilly collar or a bow or something at my neck, something that drew attention away from the fact that I have breasts and behind and hips and the various things. She is the coolest person, so bubbly and full of happiness. I'm so glad the C word didn't break her down. I know she is really cool. I really like her a lot. Church. Here's the other part I wanted to say real quick. I wanted to read this because I wanted to explain how she's right on the money about this and how other people that like to say this are not on the money, like to say something different. This is 6% in. Church. This is where I will debunk the claim that ATI is a church. Very often, an outsider, remember that, an outsider will confuse the two, but they are more like a Venn diagram of organizations. You know what Venn diagrams are? They're usually circles. And like it would be ATI, it would be church, and there would be some tiny overlap, but it would not be the same thing at all. It would just be two separate organizations with slightly different focus that would overlap in tiny places. The main difference is a church has one set of beliefs and is responsible for a person's spiritual well-being. ATI is responsible for education and has members of several religious denominations. And then she goes on to name Amish, Baptist, Calvinists, Christian Jews, Evangelical, Mennonite, Protestant, River Brethren, and all the non-denominational Christians you can think of. ATI does not hold worship services. She goes on to explain that ATI actually aligns the most closely with the independent fundamentalist Baptists. My friend Bruce Gerenzer was the independent fundamentalist Baptist, and I would say that's a true statement. They both intermesh just about the best of any group. Where I went, we were a bunch of all backslidden Catholics who decided to make up our own church. And so this is where we're going. Head coverings, loose, still too loose for me, jumpers, loose enough to hide a pregnancy if I had been fortunate enough to be able to carry one to term beyond the few kids I had, which I was not, unfortunately. And I was trying to because I was told by my church that that was my entire role in life, was to have as many godly Christian soldiers as possible. And she talks about not having fit in well, about being upset that the boys in the alert system were allowed to do cool things like go rappel down the side of buildings, firefight, just do stuff that you and I would consider very, very, very masculine. Heather, I feel you. I always had problems with that. In fact, I have to say that Sinful B, even though I wore these things, would run away to my friend Chloe's house sometimes, where we would smoke cigars and shoot tin cans off the fence line with a pellet gun. Really, really rebellious. That was our rebellion. That and the few times we ran away to do go-karts together, because neither one of us was that feminine compared to how we were taught to be through the church. And we had to run around sometimes and just blow off pressure in order to be able to pretend to be a good, submitting Christian wife, head covering, wearing the loose clothing so no man could oogle your body. You're not going to make a man go to sin. So if you hadn't thought about reading this book, bug your library to get it, or just order a copy. I'm going to put a link to Amazon in my description below in case you want to order it that way. I know a lot of people are objecting to Amazon, and I don't like their business practices, but I'm kind of stuck with them here in Costa Rica. I don't have a lot of options for getting books and things unless I use Amazon. So this is my really quick live I wanted to do. I want to talk a little bit about this book because the book is making me laugh. I can tell right now that Heather and I have very similar, very, very similar senses of humor. It's definitely worth it, Carolyn. It's pretty interesting. So I'm only to chapter, I think, 5 right now, but I'm starting to get in the swing of this. The explanations at the front will answer just about all your questions about the IBLP, ATI, the wisdom booklets, the whole thing. Okay, you guys, I'm going to go. It's Tuesday. I'm supposed to be cooking a pizza right now instead of parading around in former fundy clothing. You guys have a good evening, and take care of yourselves. Life is too short to be stressing over anything. I took a mental health today where I just turned off Twitter and Facebook so I didn't have to deal with any of that. And I have a tale to tell about that when I come back, about Facebook.